Yeah,
to
I
make it
mean,
as possible.
I don't want to take credit. I think just when you put the idea out there, like higher than yourself, or kind of, let people kind of flock to the bat signal. It's kind of like, what makes a city rich, right? Like it's not a typically like a homogenous population of like, oh, we're all doing the same thing. We look the same. We have the same, like those. There's definitely a time and place where that's can be nice, but like, you look at any kind of major city, right? Like there's just a clash of different cultures and ideas and philosophies. So it's like it's pretty important for us to kind of like make sure that we kind of accommodate that. And so we are careful to try to like make sure that we're curating that culture of just like randomness that can make something, I think, special in the long run, even though if it's maybe harder to
I
navigate
love
in the
everything.
initial sense.
Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush.
Awesome.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey Raj.
Yeah, Angelo.
Hey.
Hey, Angelo. Nice to meet you.
Did I? Is your name Rosh? I haven't met you guys yet. I've only talked to 10K Rotator. Is it Rosh and
Amrit,
Yep.
exactly.
awesome? Well, nice to meet you all.
Yeah, you as well.
Were you guys all in build space together? This was part of the crew, or you guys knew each other from beforehand?
Good, Amrit. You want to tell him about the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be pretty good. So, like, we all met each other during Build Space, each one of us. 10 kids like, yo, I have a monkey as my picture. And I'm like, oh crap, you have a monkey. You're an NFT trader. Let's go. Like, what else do you have? Then we eventually discovered that we both have Mad Lads. And the next day, he's like, bro, there's another dude with a Mad Lad. I'm like, oh crap, at Build Space, small world. So that's how like
Nice,
me,
nice.
Rosh, and 10K linked essentially.
Yeah,
And after that went, we're just on a late night walk. It was like 12 or 1 a.m. We were like, we should build something. Like, let's build something. Breakpoint's coming up. And generally, like, there's so many like things in the space, so much innovation left to do. So we're
yeah,
just thinking of different apps to build. And eventually, like, we got different ideas. But then the question comes up is like, has that already been done?
yeah.
And how do you actually know, like in the crypto space, the app discoverability is just like not that great. There could be so many open
Yeah.
source projects and you wouldn't know about them. And
Well, even if
that's what, like,
any,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just saying, even if something's been done, doesn't mean it's never a bad idea to build it. Anyways, it's distribution is everything.
Exactly, you just gotta
Absolutely,
do it
yeah.
better.
Yeah, yeah,
So we're just thinking about all of this, and we're like, okay, like, since like there's no good way to like discover apps currently, and that's the core of the problem, because like people just keep on building the same thing over and over again, and it's just a cycle. So the previous apps that are built, they're not being used, so people abandon them, and they should, if people utilize them and build upon them, then the factor of innovation is going to increase, and it should
that's
be that
true.
way.
Yeah,
So that's why we
yeah,
started building block builds, where like we're basically adding different apps to our list, to our aggregator. So if you want to like know, hey, I need this app for this functionality, just search by its functionality. You don't even need to know the name. So that's like
okay.
one of the cool factors that we have. So you can build upon these apps, discover them very easily, and there's no just
That's a
like,
good.
oh,
That's a
it's on
good.
social media, and then
Yeah,
you
that's a
just use
good
the
point
list.
too, because it's you search by function rather than name, because there's just so many names. Like you go on Product Hunt, you just see the name and then the one-liners, but it should be the one-liners should be first. Like, what does it do? Or I need this solution. What does it? And then, yeah, that's cool. Right on.
Exactly, like
Well,
search for function and then sort of like get everything else because that's what we're looking for, right?
yeah,
True.
and then back
No one's
into
gonna
it.
But
be
Yeah,
Yeah, no one's gonna be searching up Solarplex or Jet Protocol or
right.
any of these
No
names
idea
by
what those
protocol names.
names do exactly. I can't. I even yeah, even Uniswap you don't, or OpenSea you don't. It doesn't really tell you about it in the name. Um, yeah, yeah, cool. Well,
all right, Angelo, thanks for coming on, man. I came across Build Cities, I think, sometime around April 2022. I think I wrote you an email asking about, hey, are you guys taking in investors? Because that back then I think you guys were raising money or something, and then much later, when you started onboarding new projects, I think you sent me an email, and that's how we ended up speaking. And then we've been doing this. I think Amrit and Raj do not know about this, but I've told them a little bit about it. But we've been doing like weekly meetups almost, which
Yeah.
you've been hosting, and you've been building Build Cities since September 2021, right?
Yeah, yeah. We're heavily intertwined on our Twitter feeds now, where I think I see all your tweets now, and maybe vice versa. So something about the algorithm is aligning forces here. So yeah. So been a little on my background. I was I was in the army for 4 years, and then even before that, I was went to undergrad on the West Coast. I was born and raised in San Diego, and was in the army for 4 years, and then moved to New York. I didn't even know what a startup was, really even much about tech industry, but I had always been, pretty, tech savvy, but just not even thinking about it much as an industry. But then, so yeah, moved to New York without even knowing what a startup was. That was for business school, and then just immediately got the bug. That's like, hey, you can take any given interest in the world and make a business out of it, which I just thought was fascinating. And so I just literally volunteered time at startups in New York. I was just like, I was really into drones at the time, so I think I just like, hey, what are you guys working on? I'll work for free. Just let me learn stuff. And so I did that for like 6 months to a year, then then got a role at a, first like real role as, kind of a PM, intern at YC company. It was a HR tech company. It's kind of like LinkedIn for the hospitality industry. And it's
Okay.
funny now because Build Cities, a lot of people say it's like a Web3 LinkedIn, which is interesting. So maybe there's something that I was borrowing from there. So yeah, did that while I was going to school, finished school, and then joined a TechStars company. So pretty familiar with both, prominent those startup accelerator programs. Was a first hire at a fintech company. We built an AI chatbot to automatically negotiate bank fees and interest charges. And so it's literally basically a product of systems hacking for banks to get in there and get money back. And did product and growth there, scaled that from 0 to 6
And this
million in
was in New York,
refunds.
right?
Yeah, this is in New York. Yeah. And then we sold that, and then yeah, and then have been working on Build, which I think, looking back now, has really just been like a synthesis of, I think, partially like the skills I acquired, and then partially just kind of like worldview in general. I think I'd been writing essays since like 2018 about why, it doesn't make sense that the, Silicon Valleys of the world, or these big startup ecosystems, should be getting all the resources. I get it naturally, that's how just urban environments work, but I think you can be an innovator wherever you're at if you got a good idea, and people shouldn't have to make that compromise to feel like they need to go to those places to get their ideas off the ground. Maybe they have families back where they're at that they want to stay close to. Maybe they just like the area, and for whatever reason. And then also, not only that, but there's so many barriers from people getting to those places in the first place, right? Like,
Yeah.
our co-founder is in Lagos, Nigeria, and like, the process to even just get in the U.S. is not guaranteed, and so when so yeah, just kind of like synthesize all these concepts is mainly about like, hey, how do we get capital more into the capillaries of markets around the world, where anybody can build where they're at and not have to move, feel like they need to move around. And then post COVID, I think the other kind of big trend is online to offline relationships. We just talked about it, how we've met on Twitter, and now we're meeting every week to discuss Fermi.fun and Build Cities and the other projects. I think that's been much more destigmatized post COVID, so that makes what we're doing a little bit more possible. And then yeah, there's some more trends we can get into it, but yeah, been working on it since September, or like wrote a white paper for it. We got a lot of good traction, a lot of good interest in it. It filled up the Discord pretty quickly, so I felt, hey, let me work on this full time. And so yeah, and then it's been about a year since the first kind of V1 of the product has been released, and now we're just kind of iterating on that.
And I've like met a lot of interesting people from the Build Cities Discord. Like a lot of like really different folks on there, which was kind of surprising to see compared to like the other Discords that I've been on. So that's like props to you, I guess,
Yeah,
to
I
making
mean,
that possible.
I don't want to take credit. I think just when you put the idea out there, like higher than yourself, or kind of, let people kind of flock to the bat signal. It's kind of like, what makes a city rich, right? Like it's not a typically like a homogenous population of like, oh, we're all doing the same thing. We look the same. We have the same, like those. There's definitely times and places where that's can be nice, but like, you look at any kind of major city, right? Like there's just a clash of different cultures and ideas and philosophies. So it's like it's pretty important for us to kind of like make sure that we kind of accommodate that. And so we are careful to try to like make sure that we're curating that culture of just like randomness that can make something, I think, special in the long run, even though if it's um, maybe harder to navigate in the initial sense.
Yeah, that's a good point you brought up there, that you're in a way trying to shape the culture in some ways, because you don't want to just like create a network state and just have it be whatever it ends up being, right? Although, so I, I was just wondering, like, what are some things that you um, like over time? There's one thing, right? That if you're creating like a network state, this is going to be out of your control and something that's going to be community owned and something that they're going to govern. And so I think this happens a lot in like company cultures too, where you start off as like two, three players and you know what you're building and how you're building it and what the culture is like. But as you scale, you kind of like lose track of that. So
Right.
how have you been kind of thinking about that? Have you had to struggle with any cultural mismatches as you kind of scaled?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're still pretty nascent. I mean, we're still pretty young. We're not, we're a long ways from what I would deem as like, scaled up, right? Yeah, we want to have those challenges, because then that
Could,
just
could
means that
you could
we're
you give us some
getting a little bit
metrics
bigger.
on
But yeah.
that?
So we have, I mean, so on the app itself, there are 850 digital networks on 57 actual cities on 6 continents. But that's really just kind of like a directory view right now.
That's not small,
And
man.
so, what's that? Yeah, but it's like the initial footprint. And again, it's just directory. The most common question we get is like, what's next? And that's something that we're kind of like iterating on for the roadmap, because we want to deliver those things where it's like, okay, now like let's get more of these networks socialized, let's get them engaged, let's get more folks meeting up in different cities where they're at. So we're still a long ways out, I think, from more sufficient scale. But to answer the original question, I think um, you know, um, really the biggest thing that we just have to get right are the kind of like what actually gets decided on, like what things are actually we're going to start letting the community vote on, right? Like if they're voting on everything, then nothing gets done, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so you have to kind of like, the full intent is, yes, this is community run, and not just community run globally, but like at the city level too. Essentially each city in our platform will be its own DAO, its own entity. and they'll have delegation with kind of this global meta layer. But we should be, if we're doing our job right, like I'm off multi-sigs, even at the global level, it'll naturally start to decentralize as more cities come online and more of them get kind of tied in with the governance of the global layer as well. So it's a very much a progressive decentralization approach. And then to answer that question, it's kind of just like, hey, strategically, like when and what do we introduce different, like more democratic decisions to the platform itself. And I think a lot of that stuff has to be kind of just like a core nucleus. You can imagine like concentric circles. Like there's a core team. We're thinking about through these things. We're working on it full time.
Mhm.
There's kind of the outer layer of like people who are contributing or at least posting or engaging, and then just kind of maybe like the final circle is kind of like sidelines spectating, just kind of seeing what's happening. And so if we're designing everything right, it kind of flows from there. Um, and Sangarsh mentioned it at the last meeting, but I think the other kind of big piece is really the values. So actually, before we built anything, even the very first part of the white paper, we laid out our build values, and I think, and you see this also in companies too, like the best companies, the best CEOs, the best founders of our time, like they all have pretty strong values that they set the company up with. And I think yeah, just kind of doubling down on those and having conviction on those will make sure that the culture kind of follows from there.
I see. So just to so basically, like what I'm hearing is you want to make this into like a DAO kind of thing, or like almost like a decentralized community-based organization where it's run on the vote of the people and in the direction that they want to take it in. Um, and I think that's pretty cool. If am I saying that correct? First of all.
Yeah, more or less. For lack of a better word, a DAO. I think you can, if you ever see like a school of fish swim together, or like a flock of birds, they all, how they all kind of can change direction as a flock. Like I view those as DAOs, right? Like you can kind of take cues from nature. So it's a little bit of a semantics, but yes, the main thing is allowing the maximum, or just at least a very high degree of autonomy for this kind of like network of networks to operate. But again, we also have to be, we have to be careful too, right? Like we have to be able to have, we can't have certain groups doing things that would be, illegal in a certain area. Like, so there has to be, that's where that kind of fine balance is, that we have to make sure that we're architecting into the protocol and holding accountable for, and all those things.
Right.
But yes, to your point, like
As
that's the final form.
Yeah, okay, that sounds cool. I see like you have multiple events listed right now on your Luma. So you guys mainly do online sessions right now, but you also mentioned IRL events. And I'm
Yes.
assuming like those be like people just meet up once a week or like whatever, like once a month in their cities to discuss what they're building, uh, all in these
Yeah.
different cities that you'll be like you're operating in essentially. And what do you exactly see the vision of like hosting these types of events, the vision behind like hosting like these community events, people getting together? What do you
Yeah.
envision that as?
Yeah. I mean, so there's this author, what is it? Order Without Design: How Markets Shape Cities, and it's a famous urban planner, an economist. His name's Alain Berthaud, and he was basically saying like markets are what shape cities, right? Like, and you can think about this, pre-internet, like a port cities, right? Port cities always became quite big because they became
Absolutely.
areas of trade, or yeah, commercial fishing or whatever else. these cities formed as a nature of economic opportunity, right? Because people need a livelihood,
Still are.
more people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, still are, right? And so, it's a fundamental truth. What's different for people who work, almost 100% or primarily in tech is our natural resource is what? Compute and content and code and everything that lives on a computer, which doesn't need latitude or longitude coordinates, right? So it starts to become a bigger question of like, oh, where do I want to live? Or where should I live? Like, what becomes more important in an era where it's like, hey, I'm not in this city because I got to go work on the the oil field or the construction or whatever that city's industry is. But you have you have this, you just have a different set of circumstances. And so so the way I'm kind of thinking about it is like, hey, focused on taking that page out of Alan's book, where it's like, hey, market shaped cities, right? Economy shaped cities, just like Silicon Valley is, the OG startup city. You
Yep.
can have this kind of anywhere, right? All it takes is a group of, uh, you know, 3 or 4 hackers in a garage to maybe come up with a venture that ends up being what's called a tentpole company for a city. So, like, let's say that company grows to, create 50 jobs, right? That might be small in itself, but then that compounds. Maybe one or two of those employees start another company, and then that
Mhm.
becomes 50 more jobs. And so I think, less about, oh, we're trying to create the next big Silicon Valley. It's like, what would a network of a bunch of small kind of local ecosystems be where, and not just software entrepreneurs. I mean, it could be for anybody. We're trying to keep the techs. We're trying to be as tech agnostic as possible, but we just happen to be using Web3 infrastructure. But imagine instead a network, instead of like, today we have one Silicon Valley, we have New York, London's, etc. And those will always exist, and those will always have a lot of critical mass, and that's great. That's amazing. In the vision I'm kind of thinking, was like, what if you had 1,000 kind of much smaller ecosystems? Maybe they're in, any city that has under 100,000 people now could be viewed as like a startup, right? So imagine a platform that is helping, or at least augmenting, a lot of these cities around the world, and then they're also networked together. So you could be in, city X over here in Europe, small, nice little mountain town, and I'm in Houston, Texas right now, and maybe we're working on similar things where we could coordinate cross borders, but then also, sell into our local markets. So in short, a network of 1,000 plus, 10,000 plus, smaller scale startup ecosystems that are all growing, and maybe one of them will grow into the next Silicon Valley. Who knows? But that's we have more than enough work to do prior to that point. And so yeah, so it starts with just kind of like co-locating great people who are building cool stuff, and taking that kind of project based first approach.
This also kind of reinforces like what Rosh was saying about cultures. Like Silicon Valley has a completely different culture from maybe like an ecosystem in New York, right? You might have
Yeah,
noticed this as well. Like there's some cultural aspects of like people that are in Silicon Valley that don't translate to like other places. So
yeah,
so I kind of understand why you're trying to align people on those values that you've listed.
Mhm.
yeah. And ideally they're agnostic enough that can be applied anywhere. Because each town has their different themes, right? I'm in Houston now, and it's a big energy town.
Okay.
It's basically like the energy capital of the world. But so you meet a lot of folks in energy. Bet a ton of way more, probably 20 times more hardware entrepreneurs than I have in New York, because
Nice.
there's just like a lot of like real world, and I don't want to say real world, but you know what I
Thinkers.
mean. Like, there's just, yeah, a lot of people coming off of just kind of like more tangible industries, and so they have that skill set, and so you see a lot of that. And I think each town each city can kind of have its own kind of theme. So as long as the values can kind of, fit nicely, we also want to make sure that like the culture is attuned to that local, to that local environment as well. So much more being as, avoiding any kind of like prescription about things, but just kind of providing some basic frameworks and scaffolding.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's, yeah, you go ahead, Amrit.
No, you go ahead. Okay, fine. I'll go ahead. So do you travel a lot, Angelo? Just because like I see you understand a lot on these like different communities, their specific values. Do you travel by any chance?
So not really, I mean, I do. Yeah, of course. I've traveled and I don't think nearly as much as some other folks I've met, maybe like in this space. And I think, I have family and whatnot and more than enough obligations. Traveling's expensive. So I'm not a digital nomad by any means. I wouldn't call myself that one, or I've really identified that when I work in tech and I have the option to work from anywhere, but I would rather like, that was a pretty important point of what we're doing early on, is like having this kind of vested interest in the local environment, right? Like, um, um, uh, yeah, I could go into a bunch of pieces there, but I think I think tech has this kind of sometimes negative connotations, like, oh, their heads are in the cloud or they're just all
Yeah.
online. So how do they even help their local neighborhoods, right? So like when I think of community, I think equally, if not more so, is just as important to kind of be vested in the local community that you're at. So
Mhm.
whatever cities those are, because that's going to be the pillar of that's the only way these things can kind of survive. And
Cool,
I have
cool.
a whole essay about this, but and I'll answer the point about traveling. About so one interest. So unlike traveling around, like, oh, I'm going to Europe to go to this place for a week, or do this, and I've done some, like, lots of motorcycle tours and whatnot. But interestingly, from what we've been doing with Build, I feel like I get to know a place more outside of my scope from just talking to folks, on calls like this, because the intent was sometimes when you go traveling, you're like, you're probably trying to like maybe enjoy yourself, or but you're not really
Yeah.
getting into the thick of it, of
You're
like
not talking to
what's
people.
going on in that area. Yeah, exactly. So like, we have our co-founders in Legos. I know way more about Legos now than I did before. And even if I had only traveled there for a week, I work with somebody every day that kind of tells me what's going on there. And so I think it is the while the local accountable ecosystem is just as important, this kind of like global understanding of different places, mainly from talking to people who live there on a recurring basis, I think is probably where I've been learning the most, and actually the part that I enjoy the most about what we're building.
But I'm a bit curious about like this one. Like how did you first stumble across this idea of like network state? Was it from biology or was it somewhere else? Like
Uh, so it wasn't. So I had. So I guess like what I had envisioned for Build, that was like I was working on that anyways, and then the network state book came out, I think like 6 or 7 months later. But I had. Yeah, I mean, it actually all started literally with the logo, right? And it was just like, hey, I like tinkering on stuff. Like had just made like a live edge table for the first time, just looking at YouTube videos, and now it's in our kitchen and it's cool. And I like doing that stuff. And for me,
yeah,
it's kind of like the intersection of work and play, right? Like, and for a long time, I've kind of never been able to cognitively put those two together, like work life balance or whatever.
yeah,
But when I think of just building stuff, I think that's always been like, I'll always enjoy tinkering on stuff, and then I can also make it work productively for myself as well. So that's where it started, and then that coupled with the thing I was talking about earlier is like, hey, how do we get this capital to entrepreneurs where they're at? So it all kind of started from there, and then yes, by nature of doing that, I discovered a lot of Balaji's essays. There's another great writer called Zach Caceres who writes the Startup Cities newsletter,
Yeah.
and those writings definitely put a lot more clarity and mental framework to some of the concepts that I've been thinking, for the reason of hey, supporting creators and builders wherever that in the world. And the crypto also allows you to make that pretty borderless infrastructure as well. So yeah.
So for people listening, it's zach.dev. If you guys want to check it out, I'll put it in this
Yeah.
show notes as well, both to Balaji's essays and Zach's essays. That's awesome, man. Like I lost my thought here. I was gonna ask you something, but then you
I can
mentioned
go.
like Zach, and I was thinking, yeah, you can go,
I
please.
definitely have a
Yeah.
lot of questions for you.
Yeah.
No, you really interesting points you brought up. You're right. Like there's hot zones for startup cities, like in San Francisco, but then there's so many builders around the world that it would be amazing to have their ideas seen, but they don't have the funding, they don't have access, and so it's really cool initiative what you're building, I think. I was wondering though, what do you think are the essential like tools and services to kind of like have these network states kind of coordinate? What do you imagine that as? Do you imagine that as something that just happens how it happens right now, where it happens in like Google Docs through like DMs or whatnot, or do you
Um,
imagine to build like your own coordination mechanism or a platform for that?
yeah. So I think it's like top of the first, this is a baseball analogy, but it's like top of the first inning. Like maybe even the first pitch hasn't even been thrown out for this network state stuff. I just think it's so early. And I think you could also make the argument that we're kind of already living sometimes in network states. I mean, you could look at, Apple has a 30% tax on all software goods that go through their platform, right?
Sure, as well, right?
Microsoft is the nation state cloud provider for at least the U.S. government, most of the U.S. government, and probably a lot of others. And I mean, classic example is look at Elon. I mean, he is arbitrating an armed conflict right now with who he gives satellite access to. That's a really big deal. So I think you can kind of argue that we're maybe already in one. And then as far as like the tooling, I think obviously we are building our own platform, our own version, and I don't even use the term network state too much. Like I think that's going to kind of converge into just like a new way of doing things, or like GovTech 2.0, like what software stack can we upgrade on how we do certain things, and there'll be a little bit of a convergence. But yeah, I mean, I think tooling selection is pretty interesting, and I think there is so much because so many things are exponentially accelerating so quickly that it's also just fragmenting a lot of tech firms already, and so it's almost like at some point in early stages at least, you kind of just have to just like pick what works for you, and it's gonna shun some people out, and some people are going to be okay with it. But like, we were making the port city analogy earlier about like, how a traditional city or typical city has grown. I kind of view in like, I guess in like this network state realm, or whatever realm you want to call it, the different social platforms are the new port cities. So like X is its own port city, WhatsApp is its own port city, Signal, Discord, Telegram, because
Absolutely.
everybody has preferences on which ones they want to use. It's interesting. I just moved to Houston 3 weeks ago, and like it's without question, LinkedIn is just the QR. Like if you connect with anybody, you just scan the QR code on LinkedIn. Like nobody does anything else. And so it's interesting to see that different circles that you're in, and some people don't want to chat with anybody. They're either not on X, and so like you won't, if your favorite platform's X and maybe your best friends is one Reddit, and you don't even bother with Reddit, like you're not going to see as much of that person's thinking as you would whatever your preferred platform is. So and it's just like, if I was on Reddit, I would have not been on this call because I wouldn't have met 10K Rotator on this. So it's these
No,
social
that
platforms, and then you could make L1s like Ethereum and Solana. Those are also their own port cities as well. And it's, maybe it's like the economic backbone, and whichever, there's a bunch of permutations and combinations of how these kind of come together, right? A Solana community on Discord that coordinates primarily there might be totally different than one that coordinates primarily on Solana or Telegram, even though they're both using Solana. So like all these different kind of permutations kind of form from these new places where we all kind of, collaborate.
that's so true. Like just this morning, I was reading about like a new startup that got funded. They're building like banks on WhatsApp in Latin America because that's what people use there. And I was
Yeah.
like so surprised. They got like a huge round. Just give
Yeah.
me 1 sec, guys. I need to open the door to someone.
Yeah. No
I'll be
worries.
right back.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I've never really thought about that before, but you're right. We're living in network states all around us. This is not
Yeah.
coming in the future. It's kind of already here. It's been here. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe the
And I think,
values aren't really aligned to what we would like, right? Like in the direction we want. So now with your platform, your protocol, we get to kind of decide that at first and build a foundation as we grow. But
Hmm.
I think that's new. I think that's new. But yeah, really cool.
yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
I think the way we leverage these network states really matters. They exist, but the way we use them, where we are, where the community is, it really matters. Because the environment really drives the interactions, the people, and the way we do things. So I agree with that point. And to the example that 10K mentioned with the bank in Latin America, like even though like there's some network states that are better than others. So in this case, like since like these people are building a bank on like, I think it's WhatsApp, right? The platform they're using to build a bank on. Yeah. So like WhatsApp itself is also technically a network state which is like more prominent in that environment that you can like leverage more than the network of the banks that is there. So
Yeah.
I think,
I
And
gotta
I would
speak
just,
in the camera phone now. So
yeah,
yeah.
you're about to say
Well,
something.
what did you mean by some are better than others? Because I mean, I think WhatsApp's still just a company, so like I didn't want to take the analogy. I guess I wasn't. Oh, I didn't mean to take the analogy too far, but like there's this, and I can send this graph over later, but like if you break down at least biology's definition by like all of its parts, right? Everything that's separated by the comma, you can put these tech companies in there like WhatsApp. You can kind of like make it red, green, or yellow, as in like kind of like a fuzzy area, right? Um, and they all where they all kind of they're all bottlenecked to being a, like, I guess, true to form network state, so to speak, is crowdfunding territory. So Facebook or Meta, yeah, they have real estate offices, they have physical footprints, they have data centers, but those weren't crowdfunded deliberately by a community who said we want to kind of join together. So I think that's where the biggest bottleneck is. And then even let's assume that's successful, and that's something that we're working on. We've actually done some on-chain crowdfunding of real estate, a very small piece, but um, it's kind of like a proof of concept. But even if you have that, even if you cross that threshold, then you still have the sovereignty piece, which that's where I start to get a little bit like, I don't even know if I need to think that far ahead, or even like I don't know how. I think it's just a long ways out. But let's say you were able to successfully crowdfund, 100 different properties. They're threaded together, and decisions are made out on how capital is allocated in in a across the different properties, and then you enter this sovereignty territory. It's like, okay, well, that's a pretty significant um, gap where it's like, okay, are they all in special economic zones? Do you get actual protection from a sovereign army? Do you raise your own army? Do you hire private armies? Like, that's a whole nother. I mean, that opens up a huge can of worms that I don't know if we want to go down that road. But WhatsApp by itself, yeah, has a lot of great infrastructure that if Zuckerberg decides, oh, I want to like actually coordinate action to this specific agenda, like I want to introduce crowd, and I don't think he does. I don't think I don't think he wants to. I don't think his shareholders would really be too thrilled. I'm like, oh, what do you mean, Mark? You're going to go start a country with all of your meta footprint? Um, but he certainly could. He certainly has quite a bit of infrastructure to do some um, to kind of go in a direction like that if he wanted to. But yeah.
Like what's the biggest sort of problem that you're solving right now, or what's been like the biggest problem to sort of like scale what you're building with the build cities?
Yeah, so I think it's a very new space. So we've been operating pretty resourcefully, I guess. I'd say probably the the biggest challenge has really just been like telling the story or like explaining this all. Like if somebody hadn't read a network state book, like how do you just explain it to them, like why they should care? Like how do you and that's what I'm very motivated to do, is just like I just want to explain this to anybody and not even use the word network state. But since it is such a it is a very cutting edge concept and philosophy, and then to back down into that in a way that's like, hey, this is just accessible as a open product that you should use because it benefits you X, Y, and Z. And getting that story out, I'd say, in the most coherent way, I'd say is probably the biggest challenge. Yeah, yeah, the storytelling aspect, or just kind of like the upfront value prop. Even though a lot of it needs to be built in order to deliver that value prop, right? Um, it's going to Mars is like, okay, that's tangible. I know where we're going. Saying that you're building a country on the internet doesn't quite like, everybody knows what Mars is. Everybody knows what space shuttles are. So it's like, we're going to build a space shuttle to go to Mars, right? When you say digital country, it's like, well, how do you explain that to somebody who doesn't work in tech? Like, it's not immediately, um, doesn't immediately click, right? And so,
Hmm.
yeah, finding out how to compress all of this into one sentence, as simple as it sounds, is actually the hardest thing.
Yeah, I was googling this right now. Actually, it says,
Yeah,
let me read the definition of network
sure.
state in one sentence. So it says a network state is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. Is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great framework to start with. I think, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, and there's definitely a lot of those pieces that we're doing. The diplomatic recognition stuff is where it starts to get a lot more gray area, a lot more kind of like, I don't think anyone's really done that yet to date. Again, if you look at just existing companies, uh, who might be the closest? Like, if Elon wanted to say, "Hey, I'm doing this," like he'd probably get a lot of people. Like he'd probably like get a lot of signups, and it'd certainly be interesting. but
Like
Um,
there's
but
some
yeah,
like I saw some like weird like network states forming. Like I think there was some funny name, some
yeah,
stan in like California or something. They just crowdfunded like a territory and then distributed passports, which was like funny to see. I forgot the name, but it
yeah.
was like a meme country.
Yeah. You could LARP this. I mean, you can, people do medieval reenactments and think that they're in the medieval
Mm,
times, but it's just kind of yeah. I mean, it all starts
yeah.
with these experiments. Ours was just an idea and some words on paper, and but again, I don't even view ourselves as like a network state, so to speak. But for sake of clarity of definition, there's definitely a lot of like mental frameworks that I think it does deliver correctly. But yeah, I mean, I think some other exciting ones are Afropolitan, for example. I think they
Mhm.
do a great job at like drawing the connective tissue between the African diaspora, and I've met Eche and talked to him on several occasions now, and it's also coming from a very real need of like, hey, there is not good governance foundations in where our co-founder is located in Lagos, because he's also he's deep roots in Nigeria, and so it's like, hey,
Mhm.
without a proper governance foundation, how does his constituency kind of benefit better? And that came from a place of like, hey, we can't build successful companies here because there's no strong governance foundations, right? Like
Mhm.
they just enter a world of that's just really messy to deal with,
Yeah.
and so that's coming from a real like a real need, and I think you see some of the other special economic zones and charter city projects forming that I think are also trying to capture this as well. Yeah, I mean, um, yeah, but it all, one common thing they have is it's not really about the tech so much as it is about just the people and that are starting these things, or the groups that are forming as a result of these visions that people are laying out.
Wait, I'm gonna ask you something that you ask me every single week.
Okay, sure,
How
yeah,
can the large like how can the community at large help you with
okay.
build cities? What's your ask?
Yeah, I mean, the ask is so, a lot of what we're architecting is, it's not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to be the leader. We're going this direction. It's more like this peer to peer. Everything will be measured on very much like a peer to peer basis, because that's
Hmm.
what we're trying to capture in the culture. But the biggest thing is just log into the platform. You can go to buildcities.network, press
I'll put it in
launch,
the show
and
notes.
yeah, press launch, and it's just a login with Discord. So once you log in with Discord, you'll be brought to the platform. You can sign up for the Builders Forum. So come to the same one that I ask you that question every week. So you can share what you're working on, and then we can kind of answer any questions you might have about the direction we're headed. And then if you like what you see, we're also selling Dreamer memberships, where it's actually
Oh
kind
yeah.
of like it doubles as it's an NFT that's actually created from, their AI generated, but it's collaborative artwork. So everybody has the opportunity to put in words into a collaborative prompt window, and every 3 minutes it generates a new image. And there's been some really cool ones recently with like Martian landscapes, and then there's another one with like a historical remix of Lincoln doing
Like
something. It was, yeah, and then
yeah,
but then
funny
yeah,
story. I did it before you sort of like mentioned all this. You were I
yeah,
think beta testing where it was active. So I went
yeah.
and like put some really random stuff and got like a really bad image,
Yeah,
but
you
I was
have
one
one of
of the
the
first ones
the
to.
OGs. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But that doubles as the membership, and then the other big piece of that is that 90% of the proceeds from that will go back into first like 10 cohort of build city ecosystems. So all the folks who have the Dreamer membership will be able to vote on the first 10 cities that will get the 90% of the proceeds. So it works out to be about 27 ETH per city. So about 50K, assuming the collection is all sold out. And so we're just kind of steadily selling those memberships till we get to that number. And then we'll actually, we'll walk the walk with having each city have their own treasury. And that'll be the first kind of like, grand experiment here of like, hey, how do we starting with capital allocation, make the right decisions and make the most use out of these funds. And that goes, 50K might not go very far in New York, but again, that's not necessarily our target market. It can definitely
Yeah.
go pretty far in saying like, hey, we're going to give out, 25 $2,000 grants for prototyping the most promising projects in this ecosystem, right? And in so a lot of markets, that goes a very long way, and sometimes just what you need to kind of like hit the right stride to kind of be a bigger success. And then we have other ways to start augmenting the capital bases on those cities as well as we kind of grow. But this is all long-term time horizon. So yeah, log into the app and join the Builders Forum and buy a dream is the best way.
I'm checking it out right now, by the way, and this is all super cool. It was just 30 seconds left till I could mint something, and then it was dreaming up a new dream. I mean,
Okay, nice.
it felt really nice. I feel like I
Nice.
want to mint something.
Yeah. It's there when you're ready, and as more. So one of the features, so more of the features that are coming will be all gated to NFTs. So the one thing we have right now is like you get access to our internal community. It gates the filters for the cities, but the next thing will be the ability to add new cities. That will only be available for Dreamers to submit and vote on. And there's a couple exciting things about how those votes get validated that we'll be explaining shortly. So, but yeah, thank you for the kind words, and change around the prompt to how you want to change the theme. The rarity of the NFT is actually number of total unique authors. So I initially thought that like the more unique authors, the more rare it gets, but now I'm actually starting to see that like it might be even more rare to have one that only has like a couple authors. So, but that's what determines the rarity of the NFT itself. So even outside of the membership, it carries its own value as a digital asset.
Interesting. Yeah, I really want Chicago on this list. So
Yeah. So
we'll
somebody else
need
does
to have that.
too. There's somebody who minted one recently, and they really want to get Chicago on there. So are you? Is that where you're based?
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. Yeah, I can happy to introduce you in the Discord too to the other guy that was like, we got to get Chicago on here.
It
Yeah, of
sounds like
course.
I'm the only European on this call, like like on like Build Cities, which is like we need more of this in
we got
Europe. Like we
we
need
got
more everything in
both
Europe.
both sides of the Atlantic covered. Amr, where are you based?
I'm Matthew from Toronto, not too far from
Nice,
Chicago.
cool. Have you guys
Yeah,
connected in person yet, or have you guys have
we
linked
met.
up? Okay, right on.
Yeah.
We met
Cool.
all the way in SF.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it was
Um,
like an IRL startup city meetup almost.
yeah, nice. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I was
Um,
like, it's awesome to just like talk to you, Angelo. Like, like just to sort of like explore these ideas. And what I love about you is how you have like a fundamental principles approach to all this. Like you've read about all these essays and networks there and everything, but at the same time, you sort of want to like, like take like a fundamental approach to building this, which is what is like kind of rare to see. In like all the people that I've sort of seen building network states, that's one thing that's kind of different and like nice to see, I think.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think these ideas should be as presentable as possible to, wherever you're at. It kind of has a lofty kind of connotation, and it's just, hey, at the end of the day, like, who is it attracting? It's attracting people who want to create stuff. So, and they want to create new countries. So by proxy, they probably definitely want to create new projects, new startups, new ventures, new ideas, whatever. So, and thank you for the kind words. And in kind, I must say, I'm pretty stoked about Fermi.fun and continuing to kind of get that out there. And I'm pretty sure you're going to definitely disrupt the MBA case consulting case interview industry, which is probably pretty lucrative if that's where you want to
Yeah,
take it.
that's V1, right? So that's where we start.
If that's where you want to take it. Yeah. So, and I've been learning more about Fermi estimation as I've been following your project. So that's what it's all about at the end of the day, is just this kind of peer-to-peer growth, education, venture formation, and accountability, and that scales, and more people come together, and then we buy land, and then we have a bunch of properties to go to in Chicago, Toronto, Europe,
Lagos.
Houston, exactly, Lagos, all around.
Do you guys have any more questions for Angelo?
Not really, but I think like this is really cool. I was just checking out like the app itself. What chain is this built upon? It uses Ethereum, right? Because like NFTs on Ethereum.
Yeah, we're doing the contract is the Genesis edition of the NFTs is on Ethereum. What we're probably going to do is each a new edition, so like Genesis edition, then I guess we'll call it first or second edition. We'll probably do a different chain for each. So by the time we sell the first collection, then we'll do the second one on Solana. Third one on Polkadot, who knows? We'll probably make it some democratic process to figure out what chain to do it on next. But then that way we can kind of, bring in all these port cities under one roof, so to speak.
Got it. Almost like multi-chain project. Got it.
Yeah, and that's why we have the Discord first. The login is because that's like, it's agnostic to the L1.
Yep.
Right.
Have we listed build cities on blockbuilds.co?
I don't think I have yet, but I can absolutely right after this.
That's awesome. Are there any final words that you want to leave for the listeners?
Not much. Just thank you for the time to share a little bit more about what we're doing with Build, and thanks for having me on the podcast. And if you have ideas that you want to get off the ground, no matter where you're at, and maybe you're in a place where you don't have the network or the resources or whatever else to get them off the ground, definitely come check us out. Come to the Builders Forum. Our whole thing has always been about like life cycle. So like the life cycle management of a project or multiple projects that you're doing. We don't do accelerators. We don't do 3-month sprints. If you're coming in, you're working on something, and you want to show up every week and have accountability, we'll keep pushing things forward and over the life of the business, and really even not just businesses, but just relationships in general. So come check us out.
You guys will see me there, so I'm going to be there every week. So on
Awesome.
that note, Angelo, thanks so much for coming and doing this for us.
Yeah.
We'd love to sort of talk to you again, down the line, just learn about like how big Build Cities has gotten. Probably we have Chicago, Stockholm, Paris, Nantes on
All
there
those.
as well.
For sure.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much.
I appreciate the time. Yeah, thanks again.
I'm actually in this process of adding Build Cities to block builds.
Nice.
Let's
Cool.
see if it's added.
I've got to jump to another call, but I'll chat with you guys soon. I'll talk
Thanks,
to you
man.
later.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Angelo.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.